Good evening. This is Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, and this is the Jacob Hornberger Show. Welcome back. I thought I'd do a little bit something different this weekend, kind of change the pace up a little bit on the Jacob Hornberger Show. And so instead of talking about a particular subject or subjects, I thought, well, let's do something different. Let's take some news stories during the past week and talk about them and analyze them from a libertarian perspective to kind of give you a sense of how I, as a libertarian, read the paper. And of course, the paper I read is going to be a statist paper, the New York Times or the Washington Post or the Washington Times and so forth. But you know, if you read these newspapers from a libertarian perspective, you can still get something out of them, and of course looking at it from a totally different perspective from the ordinary person, the non-libertarian. But before we do that, let me first mention that I got an email from the Gary Johnson campaign this morning indicating that CNN is barring Johnson from participating in the New Hampshire presidential debate for the Republican presidential nomination. Now, didn't I tell you this? I mean, isn't this what we discussed last weekend? That the statists are absolutely terrified about the libertarians and libertarianism, that they don't quite know what to do with libertarians. You know, part of them says, let's ignore them. Let's just ignore the libertarians. And the other ones are saying, oh, no, we've got to go on the attack. And so that they've got this conflict, but the real fear that's just striking hard within these statists is the fear that more and more people are getting excited about libertarianism, that libertarianism is rising to the surface, and that terrifies them. I mean, it terrifies them as much as, you know, freedom advocates in China are advocating freedom there. I mean, look, here Johnson he's a two-term governor of New Mexico, and it doesn't matter to me whether you're supporting Ron Paul or one of the statists there in the race, or maybe even Obama. I mean, it's ridiculous to be barring a candidate that is announced for president, that is out there raising funds, and that has 2 terms as governor of a major state under his belt. Now, notice that they don't mind keeping in this guy named Herman Cain. I mean, you know, who is he? You know, what, because he owned a pizza chain or whatever, that automatically qualifies him? No, it's because he subscribes to statist positions. He's not going to be doing what the libertarians are doing, you know, talking about drug legalization or talking about bringing the troops out of these imperialist wars in Afghanistan, Iraq, Yemen, Pakistan, the whole kit and caboodle of them. Now, this is what Johnson and Ron Paul are going to be doing. And you see, they saw him in that debate down there in, where was it, South Carolina, and they saw them sort of like hitting from 2 different libertarian directions with the statists in the middle. And man, the statists don't like that at all. I mean, imagine 2 libertarians, major libertarians, a sitting congressman, a 2-term governor of New Mexico, both running for the nomination at the same time. And this is very exciting for libertarians. But what do the statists do? Oh, no, we've got to block him out. He's not high enough in the polls. Well, duh. I mean, the guy's just announced. He's never run for president before. What do they think? He's going to jump up at 80% in the polls? I mean, you see, this is their predilection for people like Mitt Romney, you know, or Newt Gingrich, you know, people that are already widely known, have strong mainstream statist positions, and are just safe. They're safe because they don't rock the boat. It's the same old statist boat. The boat, by the way, that's taking this nation to bankruptcy and moral debauchery and whatever. But, hey, that's their thing. Now, I don't know about this, but I'm willing to bet that CNN was up there with, you know, on the invasion of Iraq, you know, several years ago, after they didn't find the WMDs. Remember those WMDs, you know, they were being used to scare the American people into supporting this war of aggression? And I bet you, $10 that CNN was over there after they didn't find the WMDs, and instead of getting out of there and saying we're sorry, because that was never the real reason they were going in. That I bet you that CNN was among those that says, oh, well, let's now that we haven't found the WMDs, let's start going to the alternative rationale of democracy spreading. We're here killing all these people in Iraq for the sake of democracy. And I'm willing to bet that they jumped on that democracy bandwagon. And then isn't it ironic when they go and, presumably support the killing of all these people and the deaths of U.S. soldiers and so forth for the sake of democracy, over here they don't let Johnson into debate. Now, it's a private debate. I'm not suggesting that there's government involved. Maybe there is. Maybe it's a government institution. I don't know. But I mean, it's just the principle of the same thing, that here are people running for president. I mean, what are they scared of? What, that there's going to be, 6 people on the podium instead of 5? I mean, that's ridiculous. Let's face it. These statists have done this kind of stuff to libertarians for decades. Talk to anybody in the Libertarian Party. I mean, they've got these massive ballot access restrictions where you've got to go out and get a ridiculous number of signatures to run for office. I mean, you look at here in Virginia. I mean, very rarely will you ever see somebody, an independent, Libertarian Party, Green Party, or whatever, running for statewide office. Like governor, lieutenant governor, U.S. senator. Why? They have to get, an unbelievable amount of signatures. I mean, 10,000 valid signatures, and which means you got to get about 20,000 signatures. And then to make it more difficult, they make you get them all over the state. In other words, you got to get a certain percentage from every congressional district, which means you got hotel rooms, you got to spend the night there because some of them are far away. You've got to get notary publics, you got to get witnesses. I mean, it's a game to limit the choices to the statists, to the well-known statists, to the establishment statists, because, the Republicans and the Democrats can set up their little booths to get signatures anywhere. But you take, let's say a guy from the inner city of Richmond, let's say a black guy, that he says, I don't like the drug war, and it's really hurting people in the black community. The chances that he will get on a ballot for U.S. Senator or whatever are nil. Because he and his friends have to go out to some well-to-do districts around Virginia, trying to find a place to petition, which is extremely difficult because most businesses don't want their customers hassled, and then try to find well-to-do statist Republicans or Democrats that are willing to sign the petitions to bring them on the ballot so they can call for drug legalization. Well, you see, it's all a game. It's a game to keep the statists in power. It's just like the monopoly party in China. That they will do everything they can to keep that monopoly control, and that's what the statists are doing here. And so I hope that Gary Johnson was trying to get his supporters galvanized and to write letters to CNN, put some pressure on him, and I certainly hope it succeeds because he deserves to be in the race again, whether you support him or not, or whether you support Ron Paul. Look, remember in California when they had that special gubernatorial election, this is after the statists say, oh no, people are too dumb to be able to ferret out too many candidates, and isn't that interesting? They all go to public schools, or most people do, but somehow or another they're too dumb to be able to ferret out between lots of candidates. And well, somehow they elected Schwarzenegger in a group of 50. Well, yeah, okay, I know what you're going to say. That proves that the statists are right, that people can't ferret out the best candidate. But so what if people have a lot of choices? What's wrong with that? Suppose there's 10 people here at the early part of the campaign giving their perspective. I mean, how does a candidate come from nowhere and start gaining popularity if he's not allowed to get out there and expound his views? Otherwise, you might as well just make it a law that only mainstream statists can get into power. I mean, people like Mitt Romney, the guy that puts together that old socialist healthcare program in Massachusetts. That's what people like CNN love. They love that type of status stuff, of Medicare and Medicaid and Obamacare and whatever. That's what they want to hear. That's why they love Romney. Romney's in the debates. Well, of course he is. I mean, he's out there advocating statism. But along comes a libertarian, and oh boy, do they get nervous. Well, let me tell you something. That this libertarian movement is growing in popularity. Every week there's new people that achieve breakthroughs, and they start to realize what the statists have done to this country in the name of freedom and saving free enterprise and all this nonsense with all these socialist programs, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, welfare, foreign aid to dictators, and of course all the imperialist programs, the occupations, the invasions, the torture, the Guantanamo. People are starting to figure it out, that this is not what America's is supposed to be all about. We're supposed to be a model. We're supposed to be a leader when it comes to a free society. And that's where libertarians are taking us. But that's a paradigm shift. And whenever you have a paradigm shift, that's going to threaten a lot of people. And that's what's going on today. That's what they're going to do it. And I wouldn't be surprised to see him do it with Ron. Now, Ron, of course, is in the debate. But remember, Ron was going through these hassles 4 years ago. Same old status hassles. They wouldn't let him in the debate. Well, he's not high enough in the polls and all that nonsense. Well, I'm hoping that CNN sees the error of their ways and that more and more people at least see what's going on here. So anyway, let me get to an article here. We had that big story about the debt ceiling this last week. Boy, was that a joke! I mean, I don't know if y'all saw that, but the Republicans maneuvered to bring the debt ceiling up for a vote, and the Democrats were balking, and this isn't fair. And then the Democrats put the fear into the Republicans by saying, hey, the markets are going to crater when they realize that the vote's going against the debt ceiling. Well, it was all a game. It was all a game so Republicans could make it look like, boy, they were being tough on the debt ceiling. They even the Republican leadership calls the guys at Wall Street to says, hey, we're not really serious about this. This is just maneuvering, so don't let the markets get all rattled over this. This is ridiculous. So this is so that they can go home, the congressman can go home and say, oh, well, we were against raising the debt ceiling. ... before we were in favor of raising the debt ceiling, because we all know that's what they're going to do. I mean, I've been predicting it on my blog for months now that the Republicans are going to cave. All right, doesn't take a rocket scientist, right? I mean, Republicans always cave. They've always caved. I mean, if you go back to, let's say, Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal, after the New Deal went in and after, the case in 1937 in the Supreme Court, West Coast Hotel versus Parrish, where it was clear that economic liberty was never going to be sustained in this country under the Democrats, what did the Republicans do? I mean, for a time they'd been fighting against this stuff, fighting against the socialism, the statism that the progressives, the liberals, the leftists were importing into our country, mostly from Germany, because that's where these socialist ideas came from, like Social Security and later Medicare and Medicaid and so forth. But I mean, this is the problem we have, is that these people, they cave all the time. They caved during the New Deal, and that's when they said, we're not going to give enough votes if we don't support Social Security, so we've got to start doing it. And so, Republicans started embracing Social Security. And the same thing with Medicare. They opposed it. They argued that it was socialism, which it was, and it was going to be a disaster, which it's proven to be. But, they end up embracing it because they've got, the votes to worry about. And, they often ask us, Republicans or Democrats too, well, the Libertarians don't do very well electorally. I mean, Libertarian Party doesn't elect, people, to important offices. Yeah, that's true. But let me tell you the difference between Libertarians and Republicans and conservatives and liberals and Democrats. The Libertarians stand on principle. You see, we don't sell out our principles, not even for votes, not even for power. What matters to us are our principles, our integrity. So if people come to us and say, well, we don't like your principles, okay, that's fine. You don't have to vote for us. But what matters to us is freedom. What matters to us is integrity, is principles. So we stand for our principles regardless of whether people can't deal with it or not, you know? I mean, in examples like the Protestant religion or the Catholic religion or the Jewish faith, you know, they don't go and say, oh, gosh, we've got to get new parishioners in here, you know, new people coming in. We've got to compromise and water down our message, or even, you know, take the opposite message here. No. They have a certain set of principles. They say, here are our principles. Same thing with the Muslims. I mean, they have a certain set of principles, and that's it. And if people say, well, that's not attractive to me, I'm going to go to the Protestants or the Catholics, I say, okay. You know, they don't water down. They don't compromise. They don't, you know, try to reach out by becoming something that they shouldn't be. And that's what libertarians are. Libertarians have a certain set of principles when it comes to freedom. And, okay, if that means that people are not ready for it, that people are not interested in it, people want statism, okay, so be it. We're not going to be like a conservative or Republican and embrace the socialism that we stood against a week ago. And so that's what they're going to do with the debt ceiling. They're going to cave. I can tell you that right now. All right, now they're going to make some kind of deal with Obama where they say, oh, well, President Obama, will you cut spending by, you know, $60 billion or whatever, and they're going to negotiate, and they're going to go all the way up to the end. They're going to have all this. It's ridiculous. Because at the end of the game, they're going to raise that debt ceiling, which means more mountains of debt piled onto you, piled onto your children, to your grandchildren. It ain't going to stop. Because guess who's responsible for this debt? You are. I mean, I forget what the average is, but it's about $45,000 a person. Multiply that by everyone in your family. And imagine if they started coming to get it, because they might one of these days. When everything starts to collapse like it is in Greece and Portugal and whatever, and they need money bad, they may start coming to seize it. They may do it in the form of seizing retirement accounts, 401ks and so forth, IRAs. It's what they did in South America. And I forget the country that was doing it. Maybe it was Argentina or something. They just did it. And, they replaced it with bonds, guaranteed instruments of confiscation. But this debt's so on you. And the fact that they have a ceiling indicates that this is something like bad. I mean, if all this debt was good, why would they impose a ceiling? The ceiling is saying, we're not going to go past that ceiling. We're not going to go over and above it. That's the maximum amount of debt this government's going to incur. But, you know, every time they raise it, they give themselves leeway about a year or two. They don't cut spending at that point. They don't say, hey, we've got to get prepared for the next ceiling. No, and the mainstream media, they just love it, and they start talking about how we need to have stimulus plans and bailouts and stuff. Do you remember during the stimulus or bailout, anybody concerned about hitting up against the debt ceiling? You know? No, because nobody cares in the statist community. It doesn't matter to them. And then when the ceiling finally comes up, they say, oh, we have to raise the ceiling. There's going to be catastrophe. Oh, my gosh, default's around the corner. Oh, my gosh, somebody might not get their Medicare payment, or some foreign dictator might not get his foreign aid. And so, I mean, you know, one paper, I forget what it is, they were actually saying last week, we need to restore foreign aid to Honduras, okay? I forget what it was, 33 million or billion or whatever, but it was like, what? What do you mean restore it? Don't you realize that there's a debt ceiling, that they're trying to figure out ways to save money here? And it's like, go ahead and do it. And look at Obama's invasion of Libya. I mean, does that look like they're concerned about too much debt, too much spending? I mean, here was a totally optional war. Illegal to the max, no declaration of war. It doesn't comply with the War Powers Act. He's already been over there 60 days. He doesn't care. He knows nothing's going to happen. Nobody's going to impeach him. Nobody's going to indict him. They're not going to do anything to it. Look, if Bush's people got away with torture and invasions and WMD scams and so forth, Obama knows that he can breach the Constitution anytime he wants. And he goes in there and says, what do I care about a debt ceiling coming up? I know it's going to be raised. It's raised every time. And you are the ones that pay for it, because you're the ones that are going to be responsible for this debt. And, of course, we all know how they're going to pay it off, The Fed's already been gearing up to go ahead and inflate it, monetize it, and pay it with cheap, debased dollars. They say, oh, well, we can't default. They're already defaulting. When they pay creditors off in cheap and debased dollars, they are defaulting. That is a default, because you're paying them off in money that's worth less, that's been deliberately devalued and debased for that purpose. And it works. People keep investing in U.S. government bonds, but one of these days, they're gonna be rushing for the exits all at once. I mean, you take the premier creditor for the United States government, the Chinese Communist regime. One of these days, they may very well decide to dump all their debt instruments on the market at the same time. People say, oh, they would never do anything to harm themselves. Well, they may not think they're harming themselves. They may think this thing's plunging so fast that they want to get out and save as much as they want. We all know that markets plunge like that. We've all seen them. And if you think the dollar can't plunge that rapidly, think again. But this is what they're doing to us. They're spending out the gazoo, both on their welfare state and their warfare state, and they're borrowing out the gazoo. They're paying it off in debased dollars. So we've got the worst of all worlds here: massive, uncontrolled spending, no debt ceiling. I mean, okay, they raise it; they're going to raise it again 2 years from now. They're spending like there was no tomorrow. They know they're drawing it on your credit card, and your children's credit card, and. But, we got to have those presidential debates with the statists, only with the statists, because we don't want those libertarians to be talking about things like this. Another article about Greece. I mean, it says here in the New York Times, Greece agreeing to new conditions moves closer to second bailout. Well, isn't that interesting? A second bailout. Okay, now, why did Greece go under? Well, because the Greek government was spending gobs and gobs of money. And it was spending more than it was bringing in taxes. The same thing the U.S. government is doing. No different. Now, the U.S., you can say, oh, but Jacob, the U.S. is more solid, has a sounder financial base, economic base in Greece. Well, rightfully so. I mean, no question about it. But don't forget that here in the United States, we have a warfare state, too. Greece doesn't have that. We have an extensive overseas empire. The U.S. government is occupying two separate independent countries right now, Iraq and Afghanistan. They got 700 to 1,000 military bases they got to run. They're killing people in who knows how many countries. I mean, now we're killing people in Libya and Yemen and Pakistan. All these bullets cost money. The bombs cost money. The drones cost money. The salaries of the troops cost money. So we have something that Greece doesn't have. We've got a warfare state on top of the welfare state. And it wasn't too long ago that here Greece is busted, bankrupt. Okay, they're spending out too much money. They've borrowed mountains of debt, like our government, and they can't finance all this thing. They can't pay for the welfare payments, the retirement benefits, the Social Security. They can't pay the interest on the debt because their tax revenues are so low. Now, people say, oh, well, tax the rich. The burden on the private sector has gotten so huge that if they start taxing the rich, the whole thing implodes. I mean, we all know that government thrives off what it gets from the private sector. I mean, government's the parasitic sector. The private sector's the host. It's producing the wealth. Well, in Greece, the private sector couldn't uphold. It couldn't maintain this enormous spending and borrowing spree. And so what do? They bail them out with U.S. taxpayer money in part. I mean, because we funnel money to the IMF. The IMF then bails out Greece and the rest of the countries, Portugal, Ireland, and so forth. And that makes it look like it's not the Federal Reserve or the U.S. government, the Treasury Department that's bailing out Greece. We're over there contributing U.S. taxpayer money to the IMF who's doing it. I mean, it's a tremendous scam, a scam on U.S. taxpayers. But notice that the first bailout didn't do the trick. Now they're over there bailing out the second one. Well, let me ask you something. Who bails out the bailers? You see, we're the bailers. And we're out here bailing out Greece a second time with what money? Well, another reason why they got to raise the debt ceiling, because they're spending out money at the gazoo. They're bailing out not just auto companies and Wall Street buddies, that made bad investments. They're talking about bailing out all these European countries and maybe every country in the world. But you are paying for it. And if you think that this thing's going to just go quietly into the night, I don't think so. Now, they've gotten away with it with decades, because we libertarians have been saying you can't go down this road forever. I mean, Greece is proof of that. Ultimately, there's an end to this road. And we don't know when the end of that road is. Everybody was surprised when Greece came up busted. We don't know about the United States, but one thing's for sure. You can't travel down this road without it finally the chickens coming home to roost. And in our case, we're talking about the welfare state chickens and the warfare state chickens. Now, here's another interesting article in today's New York Times. It's called Ghosts of Guatemala's Past by Stephen Schlesinger. What he's talking about is that last week the Guatemalan legislature decided to rehabilitate the former president of Guatemala, a man named Jacobo Arbenz, who had been elected by a landslide in around 1950. Democratically elected. I mean, here was a country that had a democratic system. Now, Arbenz happened to be your model leftist. I mean, he was in the mold of Franklin Roosevelt. Okay, I mean, he had that same vision of let's use the government. I mean, we all know how. Well, we don't all know. The statists don't know this, but libertarians do. That Roosevelt revolutionized American life, revolutionized our economic system. He converted it from one, based primarily on free markets, free enterprise, into a welfare state. I mean, this was. Okay, there had been a lot of regulations and stuff before that, but here was the real advent. I mean, Social Security, that was the crown jewel of the welfare state. That came in existence during Roosevelt. That was a socialist program, Social Security, that originated among the socialists of Germany. Roosevelt imports it here. He calls it saving free enterprise. But the whole idea that Roosevelt had was to convert the federal government into an instrument by which wealth was taken from the rich and given to the needy, to the poor. I mean, that's the whole idea of the welfare state. And it shocked Americans at the time because, you see, Americans had not lived, by and large, you could find exceptions anywhere, but, there was never any Social Security before that. No Medicare, no Medicaid, no welfare to speak of, no public schooling. At least not in the 1800s, no drug war, no torture, no standing army, wars of aggression, and so forth. Roosevelt turned everything upside down. And, of course, with the assistance of the income tax that had come into existence in 1913, I mean, everything went upside down in America. The government became in charge. The citizen became subservient. And, of course, they got away with it by saying, it's all designed to save free enterprise. Free enterprise has failed. Well, as we talked about in this program before, it wasn't free enterprise that failed. It was the government, the Federal Reserve. I mean, that's what caused the stock market crash. So here was Roosevelt's philosophy. He was a progressive, a liberal leftist. Well, that's what Arbenz was. Arbenz was a leftist. Some people called him a communist, but, they called Roosevelt a communist too. But they both shared this vision, take from the rich and give to the poor. And, Arbenz comes up with this land redistribution program that was going to take land from United Fruit Company, which is a major U.S. corporation operating in Central America, big connections in Congress and in Washington and so forth, especially with the Dulles brothers, Allen Dulles and J. Foster Dulles. Allen Dulles was head of the CIA. And so United Fruit comes into Washington and says, hey, Arbenz is taking land from us. They had huge land holdings, much of which they weren't using. And so Arbenz says, we're going to redistribute this to the peasants, but we're going to pay you for it. It's no different in principle from Roosevelt's nationalization of gold. Okay? I mean, when Roosevelt declared it illegal for everyone to own gold, turn your gold into the government, we'll pay you in debased dollars and so forth. That's essentially what Arbenz was doing. Well, United Fruit comes up, and with its connections with Dulles and so forth, the Dulles brothers, they concoct a scheme. Eisenhower gets together with the CIA, and they go in there and they have this elaborate, brilliant coup. I mean, it was absolutely brilliant the way they ran it, and they got Arbenz to surrender power, and they installed some army colonel, and then there was just a series of army personnel for decades after that. I mean, it kind of shows you that this predilection that the U.S. government has for generals today, military dictatorships, and so forth. I mean, like Egypt, like where they're extolling the Egyptian dictatorship. They keep sending foreign aid and so forth. And I mean, they like military dictatorships. They liked Pinochet. In Chile, when Pinochet ousted Allende because he was a general. They liked Pervez Musharraf, recent, just not too long ago in Pakistan. He was a general. They like the military order, the U.S. government does. It comes in. So this was one of the earliest attempts at regime change. Wasn't the earliest attempt. The CIA came into existence when, 1947 or so? Well, it wasn't until, 53 that they go into Iran. Because the Iranian government had nationalized oil there, much to the chagrin of the British Empire. At that time, the British Empire was still around and still controlling colonies and so forth. And so the British couldn't engage in this coup. The Iranian officials had ousted all of them, so they couldn't maneuver around. But they got the U.S. to do it. And the CIA went in there and they ousted the democratically elected prime minister, a man named Mohammad Mossadegh, and they installed their dictator. He wasn't a general, but he was the Shah of Iran. And this man proceeds to do what the dictators are doing in the Middle East that the U.S. has been supporting for decades, torturing his own people, oppressing them, making sure he maintains power, hauling people into the dungeons if they object to this tyrannical control, with the full support of the CIA. But that was the thrust of the U.S. government. Still is a thrust. Regime change. Getting their people in public office and these things. And Guatemala was second. That was in 1954. And they go in there, they oust Arbenz, they put the series of military dictatorships in, and they think it's a big success. I mean, they got, plaques in the CIA offices of, extolling how brilliant and successful they were. I mean, imagine you going in there and altering the democratic society of a country so that you can get your dictator into power. I mean, it really goes to show you what hypocrites these guys are. When they say, oh, America stands for democracy. Well, maybe America does, but the U.S. government doesn't, because they knocked out Mossadegh, they knocked out Arbenz, and of course, look at all these dictatorships that they control and they support today in the Middle East and Latin America and so forth. Well, so now, what happened then after the U.S. put in these series of dictatorships, that the democratic system in Guatemala was destroyed. I mean, just destroyed. You've got this totalitarian military dictatorship that stays in power decade after decade, along with a civil war that kills an estimated 1 million Guatemalan people. I mean, this is the legacy of the CIA in Guatemala. I mean, it's just an absolute horror story. And so what's happened is that the Arbenz family went to the legislature in Guatemala and said, "Look, they finally entered a peace treaty, with the dissidents that remember I told you they killed about 1 million people there. Well, there was a civil war going on. Well, finally that was settled, and now the Arbenz family went to the legislature and said, "Look, we want our grandfather to be rehabilitated here." So they've got a plaque, they've got a new special section of a museum down there that's going to be devoted to him. They got other stuff going on. I forget what is being named after him. And I mean, they're starting to realize that this is classic U.S. imperialism, U.S. interventionism, and with horrible results. I mean, absolutely horrific results. And so, what is the relevance of that today? Well, we see it today. I mean, this is what all this foreign policy in the Middle East is about, is ousting their people from public office and putting in their dictators. I mean, that's what regime change in Iraq was all about. You know, when they took the sanctions and imposed them on Iraq after the Persian Gulf War, it was all designed, it was intended to get rid of Saddam Hussein and put in their dictator. Now remember that Saddam Hussein had been their dictator. In the 1980s, he had been the dictator for the U.S. government. You know, when they say that he had WMDs, you know how they figured he had WMDs? They had the receipts, because they were the ones that gave him the WMDs. A lot of Americans don't realize that. You know, they think, oh, WMDs, Saddam Hussein's coming to get us. But they never asked, where did he get these WMDs? Well, and certainly the government's not going to ask. Well, because he got them from the United States and other Western countries, because he was their dictator in the 1980s. They wanted him to kill Iranians with the WMDs. And why Iranians? Because the Iranians had ousted the Shah, the U.S. dictator there, from power because they were sick and tired of his tyranny and all the people he was torturing and killing. And they put in this radical Islamic regime. You know, unfortunately, they didn't install Mossadegh. But I mean, you know, they had destroyed the democratic system in Iran too with this coup that put the Shah in. So I mean, this idea of regime change is not new. You know, ousting the Taliban and putting this crooked, corrupt, dictatorial regime. They say, oh, it's been elected. What? Karzai's been elected? Yeah, that's their position, that if it's a fraudulent election where it's clear that all the ballots are stuffed, that they call that an election. Well, if that's an election, then I guess they're going to tell me that, you know, Fidel Castro's been elected, or that the rulers in the Soviet bloc countries were elected. I mean, it's ridiculous. If you have a fraudulent election, that is not an election. That is not being elected. They've got a dictator in power. Karzai is their dictator, just like it was with Saddam Hussein and the Shah of Iran and that colonel that army colonel they put in Guatemala and Pinochet in Chile and any number of others. I mean, I'm just trying to show you that this thing has roots. This foreign policy of interventionism and imperialism and of course all the money that they have to spend to do it. Here's an article last week about, you know, harsh bill for illegal immigrants in Alabama. You see, they not only copied what they did in Arizona, they went beyond it, and they're making it illegal for people to rent to illegal immigrants. You know, now they got to ask everybody, well, let me see your papers. I mean, they've essentially turned landowners into agents of the government, just like in Cuba. You know, and then there's going to be spies. You know darn well there's going to be neighborhood spies calling up the government saying, I saw a dark-skinned person walking into my neighbor's house. Can you come and check him out? And then, you know, they're, of course, attacking the employers. I mean, this is the most unbelievable thing about the war on immigrants. I mean, for one thing, it's not surprising that people look for scapegoats. You know, there's one and only one cause. Let me repeat this. Let me emphasize it. Let me underline it. There is one and only one cause for the economic woes that America is suffering and that the American people are suffering. You know, high unemployment, distress, or whatever. That one reason is the U.S. government, okay? It's the U.S. government, the welfare state that's cracking apart, and the warfare state that's cracking apart. We've been saying it for decades, we libertarians, but now it's happening, and they may be able to keep it going for a while, but that's the cause, that's the root cause of America's economic woes. The problem is all too many Americans don't want to confront that. Government's their daddy. Government's their God. Government gives them their retirement, their health care, their education. I mean, government's their everything. It's their daddy, their mommy. And so what do? They say, oh, it must be the illegal immigrants. I mean, it's no different. There's been nations throughout history that have looked for scapegoats when things go sour. And immigrants are a perfect scapegoat because they can't fight back. Everybody knows they can't fight back. If they fight back, they're caught and they're deported. And in Alabama, of course, they're suffering many woes down there, economic, natural disasters, and so forth. So what's the best thing to do? Lash out at immigrants. And, of course, at employers, too. Now, get this. You know, when I make money, it's my money, right? I mean, it doesn't belong to you. It doesn't belong to society, to the government, or whatever. Well, under principles of private ownership of property, which money is property, I got a moral right to do whatever I want with my money. You know, society may disagree with me. They may say, oh, Jacob, you shouldn't be spending your money that way. Well, tough luck. It's none of your business. You know, go manage your own life. But it's my money. I have a right to spend it on whatever I want to spend it on. If I want to hire people that are dark-skinned, that maybe don't dress too well, I want to use my money for that, that's my right. It's a moral right. It's a fundamental right. It's called freedom of association. It's called economic liberty. It's called living your life the way you want, as long as you're not going out and initiating force against another human being. I mean, there was once a time when Americans talked about fundamental rights. I mean, that's what the Declaration of Independence was all about. So here are the employers. It's their business. They want to hire somebody at a mutually agreed upon wage. And these poor people, I mean, don't you just love that this is all happening with Obama? Obama's over here attacking these businesses too. Last week they had a bunch of publicity about his raids as well. And the Democrats say, oh, we love the poor, needy, and disadvantaged. Don't you just love to hear that as a libertarian, you know, when we call for the repeal of these welfare state programs? Oh, the liberals come back, oh, you hate the poor, needy, and disadvantaged. Well, it's such nonsense, because here you've got poor people they're not going on welfare. Now, you know, notice that these attacks are not at the welfare office. This is what I've said from the very beginning. You never see the raiders, the government agents at the welfare offices raiding the welfare office. You always see them attacking private businesses, because that's where people are working. And so here these guys working, and you know, you got businesses that are trying to run a business. In Arizona, they had this Mexican restaurant chain that's very popular called Chuy's. That you know, they people love the music, the mariachis and the margaritas and stuff. They were hiring a bunch of illegal aliens. They just got busted. The two owners, the feds went in and went after them. Oh, by the way, they're just letting the immigrants go, because you see, Democrats love the poor, needy, and disadvantaged. They want to go after those bourgeois swine of capitalist pigs, owners of these businesses. They're exploiting these people. You know, do you get my drift about how there's not any difference at all between a liberal and a conservative? I mean, you've got hypocrisy, you've got statism, you've got these wars, war on immigrants, war on drugs, war on poverty, war on literacy, war on terrorism. I mean, it's ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. And the worse things get, they go after the scapegoats. Absolutely atrocious. Here's an article about Libya, that the House passes a resolution to rebuke Obama for continuing in Libya in violation of the War Powers Act. What's that all about? They passed a resolution? I mean, the resolution has no binding effect at all. The man is violating the law, dudes. I mean, you know, okay, you've got the Constitution. That's one thing. That requires a congressional declaration of war before a president can wage war. That is the law. I mean, it is the law that we, the people, impose on Obama and every other president, that we impose on Congress. They pass their laws on us. You know, when you go get caught speeding or possession of a marijuana joint or whatever, they're not going to say, oh, we'll just ignore it. We'll just ignore it. No, they're going to come after you and they're going to slam you into the slammer, especially if you're a libertarian. But here's Obama. He's violating the Constitution. Now he's violating the congressional law, the War Powers Act, that says after 60 days, you got to come and ask for permission. He's just ignoring it. Even though when he was running for office, he said no president has that authority. Well, if he's breaking the law, isn't that a high crime or misdemeanor? Instead of passing these resolutions, why don't you pass articles of impeachment? Force that man into the Senate to defend himself, to show why he shouldn't be removed from office for violating the law. Both laws, the War Powers Act and the Constitution. I mean, that'll get his attention. But as I was indicated earlier, these people don't care. Look, Bush got away with the illegal spying. Remember the NSA spying, where everybody concedes that he broke the law, that the telecoms broke the law, that they illegally gave all their customers information to the government, except for one. I mean, the guy, he should go down in history as one of the greatest Americans ever, and that was Joe Nocchio from Quest. I mean, he said to the feds, no, I'm not going to participate in this. But all the rest said, yeah, let's do it, work with the Fed, just like they do in Cuba, the little neighborhood snitches and so forth. So they violated the law. They broke the law. Nobody goes to jail for it. Nobody gets punished for it. They can't even sue because Congress says, oh, we're going to make them immune. We're going to make them immune from all this liability because they're good Americans. They break the law when the government asks them to. You have the torture people. You've got the wars of aggression people. I mean, you got 2 wars, occupations based on no declaration of war. That's a violation of the law, the Constitution. Nobody cares. Nobody in Congress. Nobody. It's like, oh well, that's business as usual. So why should Obama care? He knows nothing's going to happen to him. Here's an article about how the economy is going down. Job creation withers in May. Doubts reign. The president's bid for re-election may feel the pain. Now, why does the president's re-election feel the pain of economic distress? Well, because Americans have been accustomed to the idea that the president runs the economy, right? Oh, well, let's get rid of the Bush, the Republicans, because they don't know how to run the economy. Oh, well, okay, now things are worse. Let's get rid of the Democrats because they don't know how to run the economy. I mean, this is ridiculous. Now, what did the Libertarians say? The president doesn't have any business running the economy. I mean, he's not competent to run an economy. This is called central planning. When you've got the government running a business or running the economy or running whatever, look at the education system or look at the drug war. I mean, everything the government runs, Social Security, Medicare, it's an absolute disaster. Look in Cuba where the government runs everything. Disaster. But people say, oh, well, there's no other way. What do you mean there's no other way? Of course there's another way. Leave people free to run their own lives. Abolish the income tax. Get rid of the IRS. Let everybody keep everything he earns. Get rid of Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and everybody manages his own life. Each family manages their own life. They do whatever they want with their own money. I mean, that's what a free society is all about. I mean, okay, we can talk about the exceptions to freedom that the United States had, slavery and so forth, and tariffs and lots of regulations here and there. But no one can deny that Americans started out from 1787 all the way into the 1900s with no Social Security, no income tax, no Federal Reserve, no Medicare, no Medicaid, no drug war, no foreign wars of aggression. I could just, no torture, no denial of due process. I mean, there were exceptions, Lincoln's dictatorship and so forth. But by and large, people had sound money, there was peace, there was prosperity. The idea was that this was going to be a model society of freedom. There were open borders. I mean, it was the most unusual society in history. And what did the statists do? The statists ended up prevailing in the 1930s. Roosevelt comes in, and this notion of central planning, the president's going to run the economy, the president's in charge of the economy. I mean, that's why we have all these problems. Because people are expecting the president to run the economy instead of ditching this central planning system and people running their own affairs. Here's an article about what's going on in Syria. Dozens are killed as Syrian troops fire on protesters. I mean, this is really funny. I mean, this is like classic hypocrisy 101. I mean, you're getting a sense of how tyrannical and just malicious and, I mean, this regime in Syria is, right? They're brutal. I mean, they're shooting unarmed protesters. They're shooting children, and they know that people can't fire back because there's gun control there. You know that when the liberals call for gun control over here, think about that. That the advantage of gun control is that, hey, when the goons start firing at your kids and your wife and whatever, just because you're out protesting, that you can't fire back. You can't defend yourself. If the goons are out there shooting you and your family, if there's gun control. Well, fortunately, there's not gun control in this country, so I doubt if they take that kind of chance. There's a lot of people out here armed that are not going to put up with that. But this is a brutal regime. Now, You got Obama over here lecturing this regime, saying, oh, well, you shouldn't be so brutal. Oh, really? Well, where was this regime back in the 1980s? 90s. That was when George W. Bush was over there. That administration was sending people to get tortured. In the 2000s. Yes, there was a partnership between this same regime, the regime that Obama is criticizing, and rightfully so. I mean, it's a brutal regime. This government, the U.S. government, entered into a partnership to torture people on behalf of the U.S. government. You see, the U.S. government didn't want to appear to be like the Syrian regime. It says, look, we don't want to look like Syria. But what did they do? They entered into a little secret agreement. It says, hey, look, we don't want people to see that we're like you, so we're going to just send you the people to torture. And that's what they did. I mean, you know, they kidnap a guy at Dulles Airport. He's on his way back to Canada where he lives. And they were convinced he was a terrorist, but they don't charge him in federal court. They could have just gone to, you know, the federal grand jury in Virginia or Washington and gotten an indictment against him, brought him to court. No. They don't do the due process of law that the framers of the Constitution wanted. They said, no, we'll send him to our brutal partner. Now, let me tell you something. There's no difference between the Syrian regime today and what it was in the 2000s. Same regime. Same family that runs this thing. Same brutal tyrants. And the U.S. officials knew that. That was why they sent this guy to them for torture. Now, we don't know all the details. We don't know how it got arranged, who made the deal. You know, you heard, you know, Bush always saying, oh, well, we don't talk to torture. I mean, we don't talk to Syria. We don't talk to Syria. We don't talk to Syria. Well, somebody had to be talking to Syria because somebody struck this deal. And it's most likely CIA. But that's government. I mean, the CIA, I mean, for all practical purposes, is the core of the government. It's the central part of the government. It's the one where the force of government's being initiated along with the military. And so they struck this deal. Why don't we know the details? Because Congress isn't going to jack with the CIA. Nobody's going to jack with the CIA. I mean, this is an institution gone wild. It can kill, assassinate, and destroy people with impunity. You know, what person in government is going to jack with that kind of institution? They're not going to do it. So that's why we don't know the details in that torture agreement. And this goes back, you know, a long ways. This immunity and impunity for the CIA. I mean, effectively, the CIA makes it so that government is unlimited. I mean, they can do anything. They can kidnap, they can torture, they can assassinate, and they're doing all these things. I mean, that, you know, if you want to go back after that Guatemalan coup that I mentioned earlier, you go to the Pinochet coup, and there was an American killed there, and guess who participated in his killing? Yeah, the CIA. The CIA helps kill an American. We don't know their role because the Congress never, summoned them to testify as a role. The federal grand jury in Washington never convened. We don't even know who did it. Because this is the CIA. I mean, they are unlimited government. That's why it's kind of funny when Republicans say, we favor limited government. Well, how can you have limited government when you've got a central agency of the U.S. government with unlimited power? All you need is one agency to have unlimited power. You don't have to have the whole government with unlimited power. And that becomes the central unlimited function of the government. Here's an article on Egypt. I mean, this is kind of funny. The military, you know, the one that the U.S. government sees as the savior of the Egyptian people, it's telling the media to hush the critics. What critics? The critics of the military. The military is saying, stop criticizing us. And they're arresting people, they're rounding up people. And guess where U.S. foreign aid is still going? You got it. To this Egyptian military dictatorship. Because remember what I was telling you about the U.S. government's predilection for military dictatorships? They love military dictatorships. I mean, it's kind of ominous in a way. Because they strike deals with dictatorships in general, like Syria. And Egypt's another one that they struck a dictatorship with. Now, okay, Mubarak was president, but he was dictator, and he was backed by this military dictatorial power within the country. I mean, for all intents and purposes, it was a military dictatorship, and the U.S. loved it. In fact, they loved Mubarak. They actually had a torture agreement there too, where they would kidnap people and rendition them to Egypt. Yes, the same military dictatorship. The military officials in Egypt would come to Washington, have dinner, hobnob with their counterparts in the Pentagon. It was all one great big little family fest. And what I'm trying to tell you is that they have shared values. You see, when the U.S. government says, oh, we're invading countries because we love democracy and freedom, and we're condemning Syria because it's cracking down, they're over here supporting the dictatorship in Bahrain and Yemen and Jordan and Saudi Arabia, and then they wonder, oh, well, why do people hate us over there? Well, duh. For one thing, your hypocrisy, your double standard, your double dealing. If you're going to be against dictatorship, then be against all dictatorships. But no. U.S. taxpayer money, while this debt ceiling is going to be raised, is going over to support these dictatorships because they haven't cut off this military dictatorship in Egypt. They continue sending them millions and millions of dollars in foreign aid, and even while they are imposing their military dictatorial rules and regulations on the Egyptian people. Well, here's an article on Mitt Romney. I mean, you know, it's really funny to see. You know, Romney can't say anything about Obamacare because he brought his version of Obamacare to Massachusetts. I mean, that's the trouble with these statists. You know, is that they talk, and I'm sure Romney, whenever he gives a speech, he's going to be like any other Republican. Free enterprise, private property, and limited government, you know. But it's all just a mantra. It's an empty mantra. They're not like libertarians. Libertarians favor a free market in health care. You know, we oppose Medicare and Medicaid and occupational licensure. I mean, if you want a great essay on occupational licensure in the medical profession, pick up Milton Friedman's Occupational Licensure. We've got a copy on our website at fff.org. Just, you know, type in the search engine Friedman Occupational Licensure. I mean, you know, regulations, and we oppose all this. We want a free market in health care. It's the only solution. But you guys got like Romney and Gingrich and all, they're all part of the statist machine, and of course, you know, that's the thing that CNN wants to hear. They want to hear the reform plan. They want to hear how you're going to reform Social Security. They want to know how you're going to reform Iraq, how you're going to reform Afghanistan, and what's your plan for Iraq, what's your plan for Social Security. You see, because in their minds, it's just a given that you've got the socialism, you've got the imperialism, you've got the interventionism. Don't dare call it any of those things. I mean, you've always got to call it freedom and free enterprise, and then show us your plan for reforming it. Well, of course, everybody's got a plan, but whenever the plan is implemented, it turns out to be a disaster, and everybody says, well, but it wasn't my plan. They modified it. They did different things. If they had been my plan, and come on. I mean, look at the drug war. Going on for 40 years now, and you know, it's a disaster. Oh, you know, by the way, on the drug war, let me find that article. I got it online here. They got that the U.S. and Mexican governments are opposing this report, and this is fascinating. You might Google this. Put a drug legalization report. That this major body of ex-presidents of countries has come out with saying, look, we got to look at legalization. This 40-year experiment in the drug war has failed. It is so highly destructive, including, you know, the ex-president of Mexico, where 40 to 45,000 people have been killed in the drug war in the last 5 or 6 years alone. This body of people is, I mean, this is what we libertarians been saying this for 40 years. Get rid of this war, get rid of prohibition, legalize drugs. Well, you know what the Obama administration says, that, and also the Calderon administration, that the gang wars will continue. I think this is what the Mexican president said. And then Obama said something about, well, we're striving for more that people. Well, how did he put it? Something about that the economy will be hurt, and he wants people healthy. In other words, he wants people healthy to pay the taxes to support the welfare state. We libertarians say people should be free to live their lives any way they choose. This war has been a disaster. So anyway, that's the show tonight. You know, I had a good time talking to you guys tonight. That was kind of fun. And I might do this again, and hope you enjoyed it, and have a nice rest of the weekend. And thanks so much for listening in, and thanks for your support, and the Future of Freedom Foundation, and your interest in our work, and your devotion to liberty. We, working together, we can bring this thing about. The statists have nowhere to go. Their whole system's a disaster. The only place people have to go now is libertarianism for peace, prosperity, and harmony, and I think we can do it. So thanks so much. Have a nice weekend. Good night.